Hi and welcome to the Spotlight Careers podcast series. I'm Jamie from the Central London Careers Hub, and I hope you enjoy this series, which will see fellow careers leaders championing careers provision in their schools and colleges, as well as our partner employers sharing best practice and valuable information for your students as well as your fellow staff. Thank you.
Hi Hilary, thank you for joining us today. Would you mind introducing your role and what school you're from?
Not at all. So I'm Hilary Tait from Sainte Union School, otherwise known as LSU, and I'm the Careers and Curriculum Support Manager. What that means is that I'm the careers leader. I'm also the sixth form careers advisor, and I have a managerial role around the school as well.
Brilliant. And what's your background? How did you get into that? How did you become a careers leader?
It's been quite a long haul, and my first steps in employability started many years ago over in France. So where I ended up after a week-long holiday for 6 years. And I accidentally became a recruitment consultant, just applied to a job that I didn't fully understand. The next thing I knew, I was interviewing people in those days without computers. And I developed a particular interest in developing the careers of younger applicants, career starters, then moved into an in-company role for a big French hypermarket chain and worked in recruitment and staff development. One of those, an event in that company had a big impact on me, which was dealing with people who were going to be let go, who had been very poorly recruited, very poorly managed, and actually they had very limited career prospects moving forward. And the seed of it all had started many, many years previously. And I started to ask myself at that point whether it would be a good idea to go and work in schools. So I became a teacher, but within 2 years, I was back in careers, but this time as an old-fashioned head of careers or careers coordinator. And when I had my children, then came back into it and became a modern-style careers leader. But in practice, a strand of wanting to help people make better choices, have better lives, has actually been behind all of my decision-making for a long time. And a lot of the skills I've used personally are quite transferable.
Brilliant. And I think that's what we need to see with careers leaders and careers provisions as well. It's that motivation and drive. Thank you. And how is the structure of your provision at the school with careers, and how heavily involved is SLT in that process?
We're extremely lucky, and it has built up a lot over the years. I have chipped away. So we have a careers leader. I don't teach, so as I say, I'm an advisor as well. We have an assistant head who's also the director of sixth form, who's our SLT. And unlike other SLT middle leadership kind of combinations, we haven't moved. Normally senior leaders will rotate around different middle leaders for their own professional development, but I've kept the same one. That's been really helpful. The head's also extremely positive about careers. In our department, we have 2 other careers advisors who are provided by Camden Connections, because the school's in the London Borough of Camden. So in practice, we have 3 careers advisors. We do also have some admin support, but as you can imagine, with the current financial climate, it's a little limited.
And since you've been in post with your role at the school, how have you seen careers change, and how have you seen the provision progress?
It's become a lot more holistic. So if you look back at the old-fashioned model, circa 2006, dare I say, everything was very separate. You had work experience in one corner, you had enterprise education maybe run by a business studies teacher, and then we had the independent advice and guidance being brought in from outside as a bought-in service. And unless someone was particularly charismatic, they weren't really part of the school. So the changes that have come in, so around the Gatsby benchmarks and then moving to the future, the careers impact system, have meant that there is a more joined-up approach to careers. In addition to that, we have the CDI framework. For those unfamiliar, that's the Career Development Institute framework, which is a holistic set of outcomes that we can combine with those. So it feels like a more complete area of work.
Fantastic, thank you. And you touched on there about the careers impact system. Your school's worked closely with that at the moment, I believe. And what are the benefits of being involved in the pilot of that?
Well, we were really, really keen to get involved because I think there has been a gap. So if you think of the Gatsby benchmarks, which maybe people listening will be all too familiar with, that's a very broad brush self-assessment. And then on the outside of the donut, you've got the Equality and Careers Standard, which is really hard to achieve, and that's externally assessed. It's a bit of a pass or fail scenario. But what's missing in the middle has been kind of a more robust approach, something that actually allows us to create plans. So we had a whale of a time with this, and we were very pleased to be one of the pilot schools for the Central London Careers Hub. So what it involved initially was myself and my senior leader, Rebecca, sitting down and going through all these criteria and getting really stuck in. And what we found it tremendously beneficial because it gave us a kind of an off-the-peg way of identifying gaps and strengths, of course. And actually, by the end of it, the way in which the careers impact system was written was such that we, by the end of it, said, oh, well, that's our strategic plan. Just literally taking what we'd looked at, that went into a plan. I've made my appraisal targets out of that. It sort of did that work for us. And then, of course, gave us the opportunity to meet with another school and get feedback and support someone in turn, because it's quite, I think a lot of careers advisors and careers leaders are in quite an isolated role. Therefore, the peer review nature of the careers impact system, I think, is very powerful.
Absolutely. I think that's some of the feedback we've heard about that's been really impactful for us to see as well, it being a more collaborative school approach of having more eyes on that and really going into further depth. Like you touched on there with the benchmarks, it can be quite an isolating role. So rather than, the benchmarks there as a sort of baseline really, but going into depth and trying to champion a more inclusive and sort of gold standard of education and careers education, I think that really helps the careers impact system. Excellent. I know this is going back a few years now, but in terms of the pandemic and COVID, how did that impact the careers curriculum in the school? Because we hear a lot about how it's impacted the general curriculum, but not really about careers and work experience, I suppose, too.
I was giving this a lot of thought because it was a question that I'd been warned might come up. And as you say, it's a while ago. But looking back, I think it was the pandemic on top of austerity that created the issue. So the pandemic itself was pretty straightforward. It was work experience in the main. So it happened while our year 10s were out on work experience.
Oh, no.
And it was literally that week. So, it's like, oh, miss, I've actually been sent home. They think there's something going on, and so so just come back to the office and we'll find you another placement. So, and the room filled up as we got to Wednesday. And by Thursday, it was lockdown. And the kids in school were like, miss, when are we coming back to school? And the answer was obviously not something we could all have predicted. Interestingly, some of them went back to that work experience later, and some organisations maintained their work experience online, which was fabulous of them. But that was the big impact. But we're extraordinarily fortunate to be in the London Borough of Camden and have really good relationships with Camden STEAM, which stands for Camden Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts and Maths. And my pal at Camden STEAM, who I've been having coffee with for many years, said, would you like to be part of a pilot system? So with Speakers for Schools, we were part of a virtual work experience programme. And we also took part in a virtual work experience programme with Inspire EBP. So we were able to maintain something, if not absolutely the ideal. The other area that was impacted was, of course, employer encounters. Again, yes. We tried to put those online. In the end, online, we managed to cope reasonably well because of the relationships we had and the fact that we were a Microsoft school and therefore our Teams usage was perhaps a little bit more advanced than some schools. We'd all been moaning about it, but we were very grateful for it when the pandemic hit. What I think really suffered was the careers curriculum. Because there just wasn't any space in which to deliver it. People were delivering online PSHE, but we were delivering to blank screens. And I felt that the actual holistic area, and the careers interviews were fine, they were happening online. But if you look at, the nature of a careers appointment and how the impact that's going to have on a young person, nothing can have endless impact in 40 minutes, or 45 minutes, even if the person delivering it is incredibly skilled. there are experiences and education around that which make it impactful because they create a basic level of knowledge and self-understanding in the human being. And that did have an impact, I would say. But before that, one of the key issues, I think, was the fact that there had been a withdrawal of funding, specifically something called the Enterprise Grant, which had meant that it was all getting significantly harder anyway. And in our borough, our EBP was axed, including the chap who used to do the health and safety checks, and he was worth his weight in gold. And that move has actually cost all of the schools in the borough thousands of pounds. And I'm sure any careers leader watching this will be nodding their heads with the issues we've had with work experience and the approach. So it was the combination of the pandemic and the austerity that was already happening.
So with work experience now, obviously the intention is to move away from virtual. And I think virtual work experience really opened up because of the pandemic. Yes. Do you feel there's still a need now for virtual work experience? Or is there room for that? Or is the main engagement from students really that hands-on experience?
This is a really good question. And I'll tell you what I did, and then I'll tell you what I think, because there might be a slight difference. My view was that getting them back outside was a key aspect of their COVID recovery. So the minute I could, in the nicest possible way, chucked them all out to the workplace, like, don't come back for a week, because they needed that, because they'd been stuck in their bedrooms, and it's like a shot in the arm of real life. Does it serve a purpose alongside physical work experience? Yes, but it mustn't ever be a substitute. Why do I think it still has a place alongside it? For two reasons. Number one, I was at a trip to a law firm today, and most people there work hybrid. So if our students, everything is in person in schools. So if our students have no experience of working hybrid, we're disadvantaging them. So it's not a bad thing if they have a small experience of that and how to engage online and how to get used to that, because the reality is for a lot of them, that will be their workplace. And secondly, it gives access to some rather tricky areas to access. So, for example, there's a great website called SpringPod that does, for example, psychology work experience. And because of confidentiality, we do have a psychology insight, but it's very, very hard to get into a psychology-based workplace, whereas that allows them to engage with psychology professionals. So there's a place for both, but mostly in person.
Brilliant, thank you. I really echo that. I think that too. In terms of the work experience at your school, for example, how does that work? Do students source their own work experience placements, or are they supported with those?
Well, this is a really interesting question. I'm going to start with the good bits, okay? Because we're very, very fortunate to be in the London Borough of Camden, where there's been tremendous development around the King's Cross area. And Camden Council have played a blinder, actually. They've said, anyone moving in, you've got to do lots of CSR for our students, for our residents, etc., which has opened up lots and lots of opportunities. So we take part in something called Camden STEAM Work Experience, which is some of the biggest companies in Camden: Google, AstraZeneca, Pine Bridge, UCL, and they physically open their doors to students for a week, and mine have just went last week. We also have companies called like Arup, for example, and a fantastic organisation called Urban Partners that reunites some of the big companies around the King's Cross area. So Year 12 is looking healthy. And on top of that, with our own contacts and the students' enterprise at that age, Year 12, I think given another year, I'll be really quite proud of it. This year, I'm very, very pleased. Next year, I might be actually satisfied. Now, let's move back to Year 10. So this is much more challenging because employers don't always buy into the idea of how important it is to offer young people opportunities. Now, in an ideal world, I would have a wonderful block of placements and I would allocate those placements according to the need of the child. So it stands to reason that you are going to allocate a student who is pupil premium, a looked after child, someone with SEND, a very specific, very well honed work experience placement. That's the aspiration. The reality is the right placement for that student might be somewhere that's totally inaccessible for them. They may not have the self-management skills to get there. There are so many moving parts in this that sometimes we succeed in achieving that magical combo. And you know what? Sometimes we don't. And I find that very frustrating because the more, I don't mean to be in any way disparaging to the middle class kids, but they are in a better position because if their parent or carer has a decent level job, they are more likely to have friends with those jobs. Whereas if your parent or carer has fled from somewhere really awful and has remade their entire life for your benefit, they won't have, however magnificent they are, they're not going to have the contacts. So it's a messier picture. We are working on it. The key thing, if anyone with the purse strings is listening, is we don't have any money to do it. I'm a great believer in Good Career Guidance report by Sir John Holman, but it wasn't based on a state school system. And this is what the Gatsby benchmarks are built on. And the recommendation was that schools find the money out of their own budgets. Well, it's not going well. Not every school is fortunate enough to have a visionary head teacher and supportive senior leaders, as is, if there was a magic money tree, I know I would have a lot more money than I do, but the support is there. And it's a terribly big issue. Even some sort of restitution of the enterprise grant, but ring-fenced for work experience. I imagine this day and age, it used to be £10,000, but about 15 to 20 now. That would pay for someone's time, and that would enable students to actually get the placements they need. And because there is more work involved now, if you think about the amount of people working from home, hybrid working makes it so much harder to find an in-person placement, especially in things like IT and law. So yes, a bit more money, please, if anyone relevant is listening.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's such a valid point. And I think you touched on such a good point there about representation as well, and students not all having equal access to that. And I think that's why provider access legislation is so important. Yes. And I'm so pleased that that's come into place, because I don't know if this has been your experience as well, with employers perhaps wanting to work with the older years in Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, and perhaps it's slightly easier to find employers looking for those assemblies and workshops. And then for Key Stage 3, it's a little bit harder. So I know with provider access holding that, schools and employers a bit more accountable to getting that representation into younger years. Have you found that a challenge, is my first question in that?
Well, it's a good question, because the provider access legislation obviously applies to universities, FE, technical education providers, and apprenticeships. They tend to be a little bit more open than a pure employer, if that makes sense, because the employer is thinking recruitment, whereas the, sounds awful, but, FE, apprenticeships, higher technical qualifications, they rely on student money. So it's very much in their interest to get in early and give them a bit of merch. So they're a bit easier. The employers are harder. So some employers have really good workarounds, compromise scenarios, for example. So Arup are a great employer to work with. So they will have a day when they'll invite Year 10 in. Then they will invite students in for work experience in Year 12. If the student then applies for engineering or architecture, then they will start really investing more time in personal statements, portfolio management, and then internships further down the line. But it is harder in general. And it is very frustrating. One thing that really annoys me is the fact we're so reliant on primary schools for work experience. I'm not saying it's an invalid work experience, because they possibly will be given more responsibility. They will feel older in a primary school, perhaps, than in the workplace. But it's very frustrating, yeah. But so my message to employers would be, do try and engage with the younger year groups.
So in terms of current trends that you might have noticed, students wanting to go into pathways post-16 and post-18, we'll look at post-16 first. Are there any particular sectors and career pathways you see students really taking a big appetite towards?
Well, it always varies a little bit per year group, because year groups, as anyone working in schools knows, they have slightly different flavour on the whole. The other thing that makes it vary in my experience is actually engaging with employers and providers. So, for example, we had a lovely intervention with the University of Hertfordshire, and lo and behold, we had lots of children talking about the University of Hertfordshire. So in a way, you can only aspire to be what you can see. So I think that's worth mentioning for any employer or provider on the fence about engaging with students. That's a really big influence. But in terms of post-16, we don't have many apprentices. We have some. What we tend to find in London is that the vast majority of apprenticeships are available post-18, and there is a very significant difference in pay. So the post-18 apprenticeships, most students have a look at the post-18 and the post-16 and decide it's probably worth sucking up another 2 years at school. We're not getting huge uptake of T-levels yet, although our sixth form consortium, which is called LASWAP, is offering a fantastic media and broadcasting T-level as of this September, which we're hoping will get some interest. And we're going to be offering a digital T-level in conjunction with Google, who are providing the workplaces from 2025. So we're hoping for an uptick there, although who knows what's going to happen with the current situation. We do have, we have historically had a lot of uptake of health and social care. This is, often with a goal of going into NHS careers. We still get a lot of students doing the infamous chemistry and biology for medicine, dentistry, less so veterinary science. Trying to think if there's been anything really unusual this year. Again, it depends on the college. If a lovely college like the London College of Beauty Therapy comes in, inevitably that will inspire someone. So hence the need for colleges to be proactive, because it's quite a competitive environment, and actually meeting people makes a massive difference.
Perfect, thank you. Are there any careers events that's taken place at your college this academic year that really stand out for you?
Oh, we've had tons. I wouldn't really know where to start. I mean, we have providers fairs as you would expect. We work with Young Enterprise on employability, and there's a fantastic day called Learn to Earn, where we had employers from KPMG coming in and coaching the students. And that's a very well put together day, talking about labour market information, career pathways, and those unexpected things that can happen, getting students into the right mindset. And we have a programme called Work Wednesdays, which is when I invite an employer in, not every Wednesday, but most Wednesdays, and students can just come and have lunch with them. And there are sweets, which is the bribe. And that's a really good way for students to expand their careers knowledge beyond the actual programme, timetabled curriculum, because that's the thing. We'll have these big events for students. We'll have an away to work day, work experience, masterclasses. We worked with Jump, and they did a wonderful employability workshop for Year 12 this year. But then what happens to the student who might want to know about something specific? And I think it's a really good idea to give some sort of optional, self-selecting opportunity as well. And again, we didn't talk about post-18, but that often feeds into the post-18 options, particularly if a student in Year 12 or Year 13 comes, that will be very impactful for them because they're at a transitional stage.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think what's really nice that you touched on there as well is about having the local businesses connect and buy into that as well. Because when they come to those events, also not only the students getting the representation of that, but they're also getting a little flavour of the labour market locally to them as well, and that buy-in of what there is available for them post-16 and also post-18 when they leave.
I mean, I think we're extraordinarily lucky with the way in which our local labour market has gone because of the levels of development. But like all London students, we have this terrible dichotomy. We have the opportunities, but it's not always our local students who are taking them. And what careers is really about, and obviously it's about helping people having economically, fulfill and personally fulfilling lives, and getting on the housing ladder, all these things that whatever matters to the individual concerned. But it's also about social mobility. In a school like ours, we've got high numbers of pupil premium. In a borough like ours, it's enabled, but they don't have to, and traditionally you would have to go away to achieve social mobility. They've gone away to university, they've gone away. why not achieve social mobility where they are? We've got some of the best universities and apprenticeship providers in London. We've got a thriving local labour market, and we shouldn't have this gap between the students we have and the opportunities the labour market is offering. So that's absolutely vital. And hence the need again for physical work experience, physical opportunities, because, that sense of I belong here can only be achieved through multiple contacts, through that person being able to kind of mirror the workplace behaviours and adapt their own unique approach to that, and merge the two.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think that's why your role is so vital and important, and careers education being a whole school approach of signposting what's available to students on the doorstep as well. Like you said, we have a huge sort of disparity in London of opportunities and further education providers and universities that aren't being attended by London students, and it's showcasing what's actually available and out there on their doorstep. So I believe your school is on Compass Plus, and you've actioned the FSQ. So for anyone listening, that's the Future Skills Questionnaire.
Yes. Again, it's been a dare I say it, a bit of a quick win. So anyone listening who's toying with the idea of the FSQ, obviously, as you've just said, you will need Compass Plus, and you may have some data protection things you need to run past your IT. So get your enterprise coordinator to get you up to speed on that. But so what is the FSQ, the Future Skills Questionnaire? So there's a lot of blurb about this, but what it really is, it's a giant, great questionnaire that someone else has written that can be automatically sent to your students, and it'll give you lots of data. So that's a big win, and it's standardised. So they've got a questionnaire for year 7, so a transition one, a questionnaire for years 8 and 9, then 10 and 11, and then sixth form, and then SEND. So that is 5 questionnaires in total, and you just pick your students, pick the questionnaire, ping, off it goes, and you get some lovely statistics. And I was talking to our enterprise coordinator, Jamie, who was saying it's a great way you could use your enterprise advisor to do the analysis for you. And I thought, yes, it gives them something to do. So it's really beneficial. We're going to be bedding it into our kind of our yearly evaluation system. So we're using a tool called Growthfile, where we're going to be almost like an appraisal. Students will be setting their own action plan, mid-year reviewing it, and then end-of-year reviewing it. And at the end of their careers cycle, they'll be doing the Future Skills Questionnaire. Again, a bit like the Careers Impact System, it's gap analysis, but as seen from the perspective of the student. And that's particularly interesting. And what we found is that it reflected 2 things. It reflected areas where we were strong, but it reflected areas where we aren't doing enough, kind of almost unintentionally. We think, well, yeah, thinking about it, now I see that, maybe we're not. But also areas where we are doing things, but they're not being sufficiently signposted to students. So it's a very useful exercise, and I would very much recommend it. I think for any school going to the bother of embedding it, I think once it's in, it will just roll in a very convenient way. So definitely get on there.
Excellent. And I think that's a nice piece. We've got information and guidance meetings that obviously take place in Key Stage 4, but not anything to really... I think what's nice with the FSQ is it really targets for year 7, from year 7. Yes. So you've got that data then for the year 7s, which can become quite useful for the transitional piece and choosing their options and selecting those for year 9 transition points as well. How do you foresee using that in the future, the FSQ?
Well, at the moment we're using it in a very broad brush way, but moving forward, I think we can probably personalise it to groups and individuals as well. So what you were mentioning about the idea of the guidance interviews, the guidance appointments, we are actually very fortunate in we are able to offer group guidance appointments from year 7 onwards. So we do have that opportunity to engage with students. So group interviews in year 7, 8, 9, and then moving forward, obviously, in the usual way. I don't think the FSQ removes the need for a focus group, but I think it's a fantastic complement to a focus group.
So in terms of Benchmark 8 and achieving that within your school, do you have a on-site careers advisor that's level 6 trained that can give that information to students?
Yes, so we're really strong on Gatsby Benchmark 8. It's one of our 100%. So we have 3 careers advisors. We have a careers advisor for the lower school who, as I said, does group interviews up to year 9, mixture of group and individual in year 10, individual in year 11. And I am the sixth form careers advisor, so I spend loads of time. I've got a little app the kids can book in with year 12 and 13. And then we have another careers advisor who deals with much more complex cases, so SEND, and students with any kind of complex issue. So they obviously need much more time and they get it. It's a good system. We track all our careers interviews on a system called Growfar, which means if we go under a bus, you've got a nice record of all the conversations that have been had. And what we're doing this year is we've started to log tutor progression interviews. It's very important to say that in our school, careers interviews are only conducted by someone who is at least level 6 qualified. So in practice, I'm level 6 qualified, but I was a teacher and I've got a PGCE. And our other careers advisors, one has a master's and also is a trained counsellor. He's the person who deals with more complex cases and SEND and alternative provision. And our other careers advisors has a master's as well. So technically it's 2 level 7s and a level 6. If anyone else does one-on-one, we don't call it career guidance, but we do log it because it's also very useful to see what conversation a tutor has had with their tutee, for example. But we do make a very big distinction that only people, and we're all also registered with the Career Development Institute. We subscribe to their code of ethics, and I don't believe a young person should be seen by anyone who isn't.
Excellent. That's an incredibly rich careers offering there for those students. And do they have those meetings again in Key Stage 5?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, with me, unless, of course, again, there are any kind of more complex issues, in which case that small caseload will go to someone who has a lot more time and a counselling qualification. So access to careers interviews rather, at Key Stage 5 is unlimited. So I'm on site 5 days a week, and students have open access to my diary. There's a QR code on the wall. And they just make the most of it, and they do. They use the service very much, and they really appreciate the access. I think they know it's quite unusual to have that, and also to have a named careers advisor. I think that's actually lacking in some schools. If someone's only in 1 day a week doing their absolute best, how is anyone going to know them?
I think that's such a special thing that you've got there at the school as well and the college, where you've got that buy-in from the students because they know you on site as well. So it's that element of trust, because I think sometimes it can be quite difficult when you've got an outsider and coming in to speak to teenagers. And obviously it's quite a personal thing to really try and divulge your hopes and dreams and aspirations.
It is.
To someone you've just met.
and that person has to be trained and trustworthy. You hear horror stories. I was at the trip I was on this morning, the person said, my careers advisor said I couldn't do an XYZ, and my heart just went, oh, how could they? How poorly trained was that person? It doesn't mean you're going to lie to people, but, there are ways and means. Careers advisor should be someone who helps you move forward, and only training is really, and experience is going to help you do that. So I personally think it's the best job in the world. I mean, I enjoy career leadership very much, but being a careers advisor is a fantastic job, and I get a huge amount of reward from that. So I know my colleagues do. And you're always finding out something new, because if your own knowledge is stagnating, then you're not doing a good job. So CPD is a massive part of it, and I find that really exciting.
Brilliant. And how was your own, in terms of your career advice when you were at school? Did you have any careers advisor and career leader support, or was it the old tick box exercise of quiz online?
It was shocking. I mean, we were quite lucky in the sense that we got given a Moresby test, but again, no one had explained what that was. It was some sort of whoopie-doo thing that the school had decided to do. They thought it would sound good, but without the context, without the explanation, without kind of ongoing work around self-knowledge. Who am I? What are my values? What kind of person am I? It kind of falls a bit flat. So, and then the debrief was with my biology teacher, who looked at me and said, "You should be a librarian. You like English." I am not a quiet person, and it was really not worth anything. But then I think a lot of adults are in that in that scenario. So what will be interesting is whether when our current students are in the workplace, are they still moaning about careers advisors, or will they look back at us in a more positive light? But then that's partly to do with the Career Development Institute and the fact that we now have a professional body, we have a set of professional standards. I believe there may even be a project underway at some point to have chartered status, which I think would be a very good idea, just to keep the quality high. And, it's very important to have external observation. It's very important to have quality control. And any head teacher who isn't paying attention to that should think hard about whether they should be having a much closer look at who is having all that influence on their students.
Absolutely agreed. With your destination of students and where they're looking to go, have you seen an uptake of signposting for technical and vocational pathways, or are students still very focused on the university pathway?
Well, this is really interesting. This is where we hit that post-18 question. There is definitely strong interest in apprenticeships. However, it's highly competitive. And our need to find curriculum time for employability has increased hugely. And I'm not quite sure we've quite kept pace with that. So that's something where the FSQ is very helpful, because it showed that we need to bump that much higher up the agenda. Because if you're doing your A-levels or completing your BTEC or T-level, to be looking for an apprenticeship, going through assessment centres, online interviews, it's very, very challenging. And what is sad is a lot of students actually kind of lose their nerve towards the end and go to university because they're too scared to do something else. So a lot depends on the qualifications you're offering and the type of year group. So one trend that we're finding really interesting is I'm very, very in favour of these, by the way, the new higher technical qualifications. And because we have 2 health and social care classes, we've been having a really good outcomes with the nursing associate pathway. So that's absolutely fabulous. So for students who, for example, might have huge amounts of interpersonal skills, but are less academic. So obviously, if you do the extended diploma, you can go off and do whatever you like. But it's a sort of halfway house. It's a 2-year qualification, very practically based, about 50% in the workplace, 50% at uni. And I really love that idea. And I would love to see higher technical qualifications in more areas, because it would be easier for students to access, because we're still dealing with a COVID generation who spend a lot of time in their bedrooms, but it would be more practical than uni. So that really chuffed about the nursing associate part. Apprenticeships, we are having successes, but as I say, it's quite challenging. The Metropolitan Police Constable Apprenticeship is an absolute cracker. It's a very long application process, but we've had quite a few successes there. Trying to persuade a few more people to consider things like data science. We've had a few people making applications this year, but not necessarily always successful. We're seeing an increased number of students who are going into the workplace for a pre-apprenticeship employment. And that's an interesting new trend. And it's not daft. I'll give you a couple of very concrete examples. One student of mine who left a year and a half ago wanted to go and work in real estate. So she got herself an interview for an apprenticeship with a really, really big, if I'd said the name, you know exactly who I meant, really big provider, who said, you're really lovely, but you haven't got any customer service skills or a driving licence. At which point she thought, that's a really fair point. So she went off, did a customer service job and got her driving licence, and then applied for the apprenticeship. And that's not a daft idea, having a little bit more life experience. But of course, it makes it really hard for us to track. So there's my fear if someone says, I'm going to do pre-apprenticeship employment. I think, are they making the most of themselves? And you just don't know what happens next. At least with uni or apprenticeships, you know what the next stage has been. But we've had some great ones, KPMG, another again, Camden Council apprenticeships, so it can be really exciting. And there's a great Camden Apprenticeships organisation which helps with that. In terms of post-18 trends, I know there's a broader trend, weirdly enough, a little bit away from medicine and more towards the allied health professions. Also, broader trend more towards things like maths, and a little bit away from law this year. I understand that was the most recent update. We're still seeing a lot of people interested in law and psychology, which is tricky because they are offered a little bit too widely within the UK. And this is only my opinion. I'm sure other people would disagree. A little bit too widely, along with criminology within the UK university system. And, if people are willing to accept the levels of work and competition involved, and obviously we will help them craft a statement, craft a strategy so that it's them, that gets it. But we have to be very, very careful with those because they are, a lot of universities, and I'm not disparaging the ones who are doing a great job, but some universities are just taking students' money and outcomes are very, very shaky. I'm being very judgmental there.
No, thank you. I think that's a really valid point. So with your time in careers education and as a careers leader, what's been one of the highlights of your career so far?
I mean, it's a really easy one, this. It's the students. It's when a student does well. And when I say does well whatever is right for them. So it's students who get in touch with me on LinkedIn, tell me how university's going, students who talk to me about the fact they've done their apprenticeship and now they're doing a level 6 project management apprenticeship. That's the joy of it all. And it's seeing those students come back in and mentor the younger ones. And it's incredibly rewarding, having been part of that. Nothing else comes close in my job to seeing the impact on real humans.
Excellent. I think that speaks a testament for how valuable your role is within the school. And how do you see careers embedded across the curriculum at your school, meeting Gatsby Benchmark 4?
Oh, well, I think anyone listening is going to know this is a tricky one, Gatsby Benchmark 4. And one of the big ones is what's actually going on. So you can go up to a teacher and say, here, you're doing careers in the curriculum in maths. And they can say, yes, you can take your Gatsby benchmark, but what are they actually doing? What's actually happening? So we had a really great project this year that we wrote, that we bedded into the appraisal system. So I advertised for faculty careers champions. So we had a careers champion from each faculty. It was my appraisal target, it was their appraisal target, and we set ourselves a series of goals throughout the year. And that could be, one of the goals, for example, was getting better tracking of careers activities on our tracking system Growfar. Another one was to increase teachers' knowledge of post-16 and post-18 pathways so they could talk much more knowledgeably about the options available to students. There was work around the labour market for each specific area. We got together a whole load of information for me to put on the website. And we had a lot of fun. It's not the end of the project. Oh, yes, and the big one was we did an audit. So this was done by subject teachers. So I'll tell you about how it's all going to evolve next year. So at the moment, I'm trawling through the Career Development Institute audit that's been completed by every single faculty. And I did it years ago, but obviously I wanted to see what was happening now. So the Career Development Institute has a series of holistic outcomes under 6 big frameworks. So grow throughout life, explore possibilities. So it's really in a child-friendly way. And it's been fascinating to see what people are actually doing. So science is a great example. They have a multiplicity of ways in which they approach careers education and guidance, from analysing the labs and relating that to workplace health and safety, to, for example, linking leatherwork and sewing clubs that they run, but with the aim of increasing manual dexterity for dentistry and medicine. They reference careers in every starter activity in Year 7. And they have lots of great relationships, for example, with the Francis Crick Institute. And it's really inspiring seeing that. So now I know that when I tick my Gatsby benchmark 4 for science, I know they're doing it. Maths take a slightly different tack. For example, they subscribe to a great website called My Path, which relates every single topic in Key Stage 3 maths and Key Stage 4 maths to a job. So, for example, it will look at how a fashion designer might use 2D shapes. So before starting every topic, they are going to explain why that topic is, well, they do explain why that topic's relevant to the workplace. So you see some really exciting stuff happening. So so it's a big job. So I'm still trawling through these audits because my aim is to create a complete picture for students and their parents of what happens where within the curriculum, but also to identify a few gaps and easy wins. If I see any departments like missing a trick to support with these framework outcomes that they aren't doing already. So next year, I think the job of the careers champions, it may be a slightly different set of champions, will be to embed the skills builder skills within the curriculum. So that's our next step, to make sure that there's a cross-school approach to skills. So we have it on Growfar. We also use Moresby Profile, which again references skills builder. A lot of our other materials reference skills builder, and now every lesson will as well. But this will obviously be overt and explicit. Students will know that these are the transferable skills that they will need. When they set their targets at the start of the year, they may think, well, I haven't got much by way of leadership. I'm going to take every opportunity I can, for example, within enrichment, within careers activities, to grow enrichment. So that'll be really exciting. And we'll probably also use some of the Career Development Institute logos as well. So that's fun. And of course, a lot of the careers curriculum takes place in PSHE, which I co-design, and also within community enrichment days. But it can't be isolated. I think it needs to be enmeshed in every part of the curriculum, which is, so I'm sure anyone who's tried to do it will know, is like herding cats.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hilary. I think that's all the questions on here covered. Is there anything else that you'd like to?
Oh, I mean, I suppose that to anyone who is a new careers leader, lean on your community. That's really important. It may sound like you know it all. I don't. No one does. And certainly there's been a lot of growing. So lean on more experienced leaders. Try and get into networks, be it through your enterprise coordinator or your local borough. It can be an isolating profession. You'll feel a lot better if you are able to lean on more experienced people and not have to reinvent the wheel all the time.
To find out more, contact your enterprise coordinator, or as an organisation, visit the Central London Careers Hub website.